Tonight's story was written by Jesse Pullins. You can find this story and others featured in his new book, Seasonal Halloween Store, available now on Amazon. Check the link in the description for more information. How much further? Feels like we've been walking forever, Boyd said as he ducked under the brush, waving past a cluster of pine needles with his rifle. Once he was clear, he took a moment to admire the frame of the weapon, looking it over like he'd never seen it before. "How many times are you going to look at that thing?" Franklin asked, coming up behind him. "I can't help it, it's just so cool," Boyd said, running a finger over the rail and platform of the weapon, all smiles while giving it a delicate touch. It took a moment to look at mine as well, trying to modestly appreciate the wonderful sleekness of the technology. Something about the mixture of the stainless steel frame and how it caught the neon blue light of the weapon's HUD, all brought together by the tastefully designed stock and bullpup magazine. It was pretty cool. I pulled away from my own astonishment and clicked the button on the side of my watch, engaging the GPS locator. The watch's face echoed out like sonar, before relaying a precise measure of distance. From over my shoulder, Franklin piped up. "Well?" "Just under 300 meters. We're getting close," I said, reshouldering my weapon. The weight was reassuring and empowering. "About fucking time. They said this one was hard, but we haven't seen shit but trees and vines. How many make it through this route?" "None," I said, looking through the trees ahead. The breeze that blew through the forest seemed to whisper through the needles of the pines, almost like a scream. "Unbeatable, apparently," said Franklin, pushing past us. "Because they didn't have their daddy on the team, that's why." "Okay," Boyd scoffed. The trees were thinning, and ahead was a crack in the heavy brush. It almost looked like a trail. The mud was damp but solid, a beaten path through the forest that winded around impassable obstacles in the brush. We traversed the stamped earth, guns held ready as we made our way through. "Do we have any idea why it's so difficult?" I asked, eyes scanning the overgrown bushes as I pushed past them. "No. Better to go in blind anyway. Makes for a better experience," Boyd said, doing the awkward walk jog you do while going downhill. There was a change in the wind, and I heard the sound of a twig snap in the distance. A loud snap, like bone under a breaking wheel. I felt the need to address the sound, but when my eyes lingered at the bottom of the hill, at what Boyd was approaching, the words washed away. I looked at the shape positioned oddly, and the wind chilled the sweat on my neck. At the bottom of the dip in the trail was a corpse. Mummified by the looks of it, but a corpse nonetheless. The wind blew at its wispy hair, frayed strands dancing across an otherwise hardened and decrepit shell of a body. "Got one here," he sounded out, gun trained on it. We caught up to him, keeping our sights on the thing as we crept closer. Despite the carapace-like skin, it was undeniably human. The exposed teeth and eyes looked like they had been dried out, while simultaneously caramelized. A mixture of mold and moss that shared the same texture that had spread across its body. It was like the person had been promptly claimed by the forest after passing away. "Looks like a zombie." "Is it a zombie?" Franklin asked. "No idea, but get a load of this," Boyd said, lifting something with the barrel of his gun from the weeds next to it. "Looks like vines." "Looks creepy as hell is what it is. Hey, check this out," Franklin said, looking around further. Something was obstructed in the tangle of weeds, and after a few pulls he was able to free it. The assault rifle was heavily rusted, each component crusted over to make it look more like a weirdly carved replica. It was dated, obviously lacking power compared to the guns we had in our hands. Whoever this was, they had been here for a while. "Let's move on. I doubt they'll have anything of use," I said, stepping over the body. I couldn't help but to return the corpse's petrified stare. "Copy that," Franklin said, stepping over the corpse. I had just started climbing the hill when my watch started to beep, a feature we all had strapped to our wrists. The miniature sonar device was designed to pick up enemy movement, and I watched the watch's face to see a tiny blip had appeared, directly behind us. Ah, shit. Boyd was already turning, rifle aimed and ready. Right behind Franklin, the corpse had risen to its feet. The joints on the overgrown body popped as it raised its arms. A guttural moan escaped as it worked its jaw. A second later, its head exploded, the supersonic round digging a trench in the earth behind it. Franklin's gun smoked and he smiled. "Dies like a zombie. Think you can creep up on Daddy?" "Pfft," Franklin said. The vibrating promptly stopped and the blip blinked out of existence. The leafy corpse seized momentarily before crashing to the ground, the vines protruding from it withered and detached. That was a close one. We'll keep our eyes peeled for more. Surely that's not the only one, I said, feeling my nerves stand on end. At least the firepower was adequate. Let's hope so. Can't have him having all the fun. Boyd scowled, lowering his gun. The overcast sky churned above us as we ascended the hill, the clouds darkening and blotting out the sun. We heard the pitter-patter of light rain in the treetops, followed by the rumble of thunder. I checked my watch. Rain flicked at the screen and I wiped it off. We were under 100 meters away. "Gonna have to get out of this shit," Franklin said, wincing at the slow droplets. "You gonna melt?" Boyd teased. Through the trees ahead I could see a break in the brush, and the rustic texture of a building in the distance. A cabin. "Up ahead. Must be where we're heading anyway," I said, pointing to it. The clouds seemed to converge above the house, and as we climbed, lightning forked across the sky. The rain got heavier the closer we got, nearly ripping through the trees as we made it to the porch. Dead leaves shook from the limbs of swaying trees, and the weeds danced angrily. The cabin looked like it hadn't seen use in years. The roof looked like it was ready to collapse at any moment, and the old wooden shingles were caked in a mat of collected leaves and pine needles. Fallen limbs leaned against the sides, and an overgrowth of vines that started to overtake the porch. Just looking at it filled me with dread. We climbed the hill quickly, casting glances behind us for more hostiles as we got close to the porch. Each of us took in the scenery slowly, panning our weapons in search of movement. The watch stayed quiet. The wind picked up. The sky wept. Boyd crept up to the door while Franklin looked in through the windows. I watched the hill behind us, keeping an eye on the dancing weeds and swaying trees. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The risen undead wrapped in vines was one thing, but there was something else I couldn't shake. The whimper on the wind, the sweat chilling my cheek. Something was lurking here, and it wasn't happy with our presence. "Got one, near the fireplace. It's just standing there." Franklin nodded before joining Boyd at the door. Boyd slung his rifle over his shoulder and drew his sidearm. Something that looked like it ate the Desert Eagle for lunch, and placed his hand on the knob. Together, they looked at me expectantly. "Go quiet if you can. I'll watch our six," I said, hooking my thumb towards the hill. Franklin shouldered his as well, and pulled a 10-inch K-bar from the sheath on his chest, holding it in a reverse grip, edge in. They nodded, and Boyd turned the knob slowly. It was unlocked. As they crept into the cabin, I followed, aiming towards the wilderness behind us as I side-eyed their progress. The cabin was dark, and through a haze of dust I watched the two of them part ways to hit two different rooms. Before I could question why they split up, I saw the twitching shape lingering in the kitchen. Two of the viney undeads, both hunched and oblivious. It was like their mental states had withered away, leaving them standing there in place. Like they had powered down, standing upright. Franklin reached his first, plunging the K-bar through the side of its neck. The zombie tried to thrash, but when Franklin twisted the knife and ripped it through the front of its throat, it nearly decapitated it. The wind picked up and the weeds danced. It was like the storm could sense the violence. The sound of the zombie collapsing caught the attention of the other in the kitchen, as well as registering on the sonar, just in time for Boyd to bash it in the forehead. He swung the large handgun like a hammer, gripping the barrel as the magazine well caved in its skull. The second hit to the temple rendered it lifeless. The third was mostly for show, and broke its neck backwards. Above the trees, lightning flashed once more. I entered the cabin as Franklin sheathed the blade and Boyd shook the gore from his gun. I closed the door behind me, taking note of the positioned wooden plank that had been mounted on the door on a swivel, a defensive mechanism that hadn't been previously engaged. I yanked it down and effectively barred the door, as well as engaging the deadbolt. Closing the door only blocked out a fraction of the coming storm. Wind wheezed through the cracks of the old structure, kicking up a flurry of dust that made us cough. Tracker only picks them up once they're alerted. Keep an eye out for more. Who knows where else they'll be hiding, I said, looking over the rooms. The sonar on the watch, and the anticipation of it identifying things too late made me anxious. These things should be more worried about us, Franklin said, flexing with the rifle in his grip. I would usually encourage the behavior, but something felt off. A sinking feeling that we were out of our element. I wanted to blame the storm. What are we looking for here? This place is a shithole, Boyd said, looking through the cabinets, the fridge. I checked the watch again. It showed a vague blueprint of the cabin's layout with a little line trailing straight ahead. I looked up from it to see a hallway in front of me, with a single bedroom at the end. 20 meters. Straight ahead, I said, motioning down the hall. The other two took a long look down it, to the darkness that it led to. There were no lanterns or lamps in the whole place, just the glimmer of light that managed to work its way in from the windows. A light that was fading quick from the storm. Boyd went first. Well, last one, there's a rotten... We need to be careful, I warned. Yeah. Franklin shrugged and followed, holding his rifle tight. I did the same, taking a last look at the corpses we were leaving behind. The vines were squirming softly, like they were reaching for something. Reaching ahead. Boyd took point, keeping his rifle trained on the doorway. The passive glow from our weapons added a blue sheen through the dark hall, making up for the lack of windows in the odd corridor that connected the bedroom to the rest of the cabin. The layout of the house didn't make sense, like it was more of someone's idea of what it should look like, versus a logical cabin structure. The roof pitched in a way that didn't seem accurate, the floorboards arranged awkwardly and uneven. The most unsettling thing was the debris we kicked with our feet, things that rolled away like marbles. It sounded like there were a lot of them. As Boyd neared the door, I crouched for a better look, holding my rifle out to use the glow of the ammo counter. There were bullet casings littering the floor in all shapes and sizes. Hundreds of them. Guys? I was just about to mouth the words when Boyd said it first. Ahead of me, Franklin was already entering the bedroom, leaving me in the hall alone. I stood and walked quickly, hurrying to join them. Boyd and Franklin were standing at the foot of a bed, which appeared to be the only thing in the bedroom at all, save for a few windows that were collecting rain on the back wall. Through the film of dirty glass, it looked like the earth behind the cabin turned into a deep slope. At the bottom of the hill was a field, and I could make out the faintest little orange shapes. A pumpkin patch. What the fuck is this supposed to be? Franklin said, looking at the bed. Boyd made a gagging noise. I don't know, I said, feeling at a loss for words. The center of the bed was tainted, like something had rotten away and grown out of it. Hardened vines draped over the mattress like veins, coiling around the bedpost like a spreading infection. But at a longer glance, it appeared to be a woman. With the overgrowth, it was hard to be sure, but something had started clawing its way out of the stomach and never quite made it. Only a head and arm had made it out before it seemed to waste away. Whatever had happened, neither one of them had survived. I tried to ignore the fact that the vines looked like they had fastened the woman's wrists to the bed, and the fact that they had burrowed through the floorboards to get there. Whoever they had been, they had died screaming. Check this out, Franklin said, nudging something else overgrown, which appeared to be his second discovered battle rifle of the evening. This one was newer than the last, still overgrown but looked more impressive than the previous. An obvious modern-day AR platform of some sort. Even with better gear, this one had failed as well. Boyd looked at the bed and gagged again before moving over to the window, so he could look outside. He squinted for a moment before saying, hell of a drop. Are those pumpkins? The shriek that followed was ear-splitting, so loud it rattled my vision. I squeezed my eyes shut in an attempt to get my bearings, only to hear another scream as well. Franklin. I looked to see that the thing from the bed had risen, half of it still fused with the mattress, while the other bit down on his wrist. As Franklin fought to shake it off of him, the mangled protrusion from its stomach came to life as well, its single arm trying to swipe at his leg while the newly animated head bobbed side to side. Franklin drew his knife instinctively and started stabbing the part attached to him, burying the blade over and over as the teeth clamped down harder. I raised my rifle and aimed, firing a burst into the thing trying to crawl out of the stomach. The 30mm caseless ammunition ripped through it like nothing, blasting the green flesh apart in a splash of dried blood and rotten mattress foam. We could feel the overpenetration of the rounds under our feet as they punched through the floor as well. The bullet's penetration power was off the charts. Despite the damage, the husk continued its hold. "What the fuck?" Boyd yelled, aiming his rifle at the confusion. When he had a shot, he fired it as well, this time hitting it square in the chest. The torso separated as Franklin pulled away from it, strings of dried flesh snapping as he fought to get it off of him. He drew the long knife under its chin and sawed away at it, and only when the head was removed from its body did it finally release. Boyd and I watched as he threw the severed head to the floor, its jaw clacking weakly as Franklin clutched his wound. He seethed angrily as blood seeped through his fingers, an anger he directed at the head by raising his knee high and crushing it with a heavy stomp. When he lifted his foot, only paste remained. "Jesus, are you alright?" I asked, shouldering the rifle and grabbing the medkit on my hip. "It fucking stings, man. It's like it's on fucking fire," Franklin said, uncovering it so I could see. Through the gush of blood, I caught a glimpse of bone. "Oh, fuck, she got you good," Boyd said, looking down the hall cautiously. Thunder shook the roof of the cabin and rain started to pelt the glass. The wind was getting loud. Franklin held it in place so I could wrap the bandage around it, one that seemed to conform and adhere automatically as it was applied. The fabric glowed a faint green, and there was an immediate sigh of relief from Franklin. His eyes were still welled with tears, and the realization of the amount of pain the monster had caused made me sick to my stomach. "Fucking bitch! Thought she could creep up on Daddy?" Franklin said, almost like he was trying not to break down. Boyd started looking around the room, nervously panning with his gun. He looked under the bed, behind it, and even glanced back down the hall. "What are you doing?" I asked, packing up the first aid. "This was supposed to be it, wasn't it? What are we looking for here? Just the thing in the bed?" he asked, visibly sweating. "I'm not sure," I said, looking at the remnants of what was left of the bed thing. It had fucked up Franklin, sure, but as far as an objective, it felt a little underwhelming. "Thought there'd be more, honestly," Frank said, flexing his arm. It looked like the bandage was already rebuilding the tissue. "Same," said Boyd, standing awkwardly. Lightning forked across the sky, so bright it flashed in the windows. The thunder that followed shook the rafters of the cabin so hard dust fell from the ceiling. The rumbling settled against the barrage of wind outside, and as everything started to quiet down, I felt the familiar vibration on my wrist. The watch was starting to pick up signals. Dozens of them. "We got company. A lot of company," I said, and Boyd swallowed hard. Franklin blinked and seemed to snap back into gear, flicking the blood from his knife before returning it to its home. "From where?" Boyd asked, looking out the window. All that could be seen was the same rain-powdered portrait of the hill leading to pumpkins below, almost peaceful compared to the amount of blips picked up by the GPS. They were funneling quickly from the direction we had entered in the first place, all converging on the vague layout of the cabin. Looking down the hall, it all made sense now. It was a choke point. "Behind us. They're heading to the front door. We'll have to fight them here," I said with more authority than I meant. Boyd and Franklin nodded together, each heading to the doorway of the bedroom. We could hear the screaming now, a dry wail that carried on the wind. Boyd took a knee and positioned himself on the left of the doorway, resting his cheek on the stock while Franklin took the right, trying to keep his bulky frame compact as he aimed. I stood behind Boyd, aiming over his head as we stared down the hallway that seemed void of light now. I glanced at my watch and saw the gathering dots nearing the porch. We could hear them shambling, quick and heavy feet that splashed in the soaked mud outside. By the time they were pounding on the door, there were too many signals to count. The door shook violently. Behind every pound was a bloodthirsty cry, and I felt suddenly small against the force outside. The bar on the door rattled and the door bowed inward, the house groaning against the compiling weight. Just when I wondered how long it would last against the barrage, the door ripped from its hinges, sending the fortified plank tumbling down the hall toward us. The spill that followed was maddening, a thrashing tide of limbs and teeth and vines that barreled through with reckless abandon. Kicking away wood and pushing past each other, they seemed only to be focused on us, their eyes narrowing together in a collective attempt to extinguish. Fire! The command was washed away by the firing squad that followed, an orchestra of synchronized percussion that decimated the first wave that stumbled through the door. The bullets tore through several bodies at a time, fracturing hips and exploding heads in a focused cone that could have been mistaken for a minigun. But through every pulverized corpse thrashed another able-bodied replacement, and as the remains gathered at their feet, it only seemed to worsen their hunger. They hurtled over their fallen brethren without a second thought, claws outstretched and teeth bared as they walked into the hail of gunfire. Everything seemed to be going well until the first call out in the defense. "I'm out," Boyd shouted, ducking down and ejecting the mag. The words hung dead in the air amidst the chaos. The lack of firepower on the choke point was noticeable immediately, and the overgrown zombies seemed to take advantage of it. I tried to steady my aim and take more accurate pot shots as Boyd slammed another one home, but the gained ground was obvious as the shapes drew closer through every muzzle flash. By the time Boyd was firing again, Franklin cashed his mag and glanced at me worriedly before yelling the same thing. I knew I was close to dry, and 2 guns going down would be too much of a falter to recover from. As his empty hit the floor, I lowered my rifle and drew my sidearm, pointing the long barrel at the closest shadow running down the hallway. The squeeze of the trigger brought more recoil than I expected, but the payload was just as effective. The bullet whizzed and a rotten jaw exploded, the body it was attached to tumbling to the floor. Regardless of the damage, the tide continued to push, an almost erratic bloodlust settling amongst them. By the time Franklin rejoined the onslaught, I had only a second to check the amount of blips on the watch. Too many. My hand gripped the magnum for dear life before letting it loose, trying to make every shot count with one hand as the loud blast of the rifles roared around me. My ears succumbed to the high frequency, and I felt the sizzle of my hearing fade into a continuous ring that ached at the back of my brain. With a deafening pop, the gunshots faded into a consecutive bleed. And although I could still feel the percussion of each blast, I felt the world around me weaken with it. Ahead, the monsters continued to run forward through the oppressive spray, disregarding the ones dying around them. I pulled the trigger on the magnum and realized it was empty, mouthing the words to reload without actually knowing if I said it. Grabbing a thick magazine from my belt, I looked to see Franklin coughing, his face a sickly shade of green. He fired another burst before jerking to the left and vomiting. A hot splash landed over Boyd's boots, making him pause and look. The bile was squirming, twitching vines writhing in the remnants purged from his stomach. We all seemed to look at it at once, and even though I couldn't hear it, I could make out the united response. "What the fuck?" Franklin looked distraught, suddenly afflicted by the bite on his wrist. It was bleeding against the bandage. I racked the slide on the magnum and plugged the next 3 shambling toward us, blowing holes the size of softballs through their flesh. Boyd looked like he was torn between trying to help and fighting them off, his heavy trigger finger settling the debate for him. He unleashed another rapid-fire volley down the hall, trying to quell the mass that was working its way over the mountain of dead. I tried to look at Franklin's wound and he pushed me away. I stumbled against the wall and watched him reload his rifle, ignoring the ailment joining Boyd in the doorway. Something wasn't right. I let my rifle fall and focused with the magnum, lining up the iron sights with the shifting darkness ahead. I kept firing, hitting once then missing twice, my hands shaking in the ringing madness the cabin had become. The muzzle flashes from Boyd stopped, and I looked to see him eject another mag. He felt for another one and didn't find it, only feeling the hard satchel of the medkit on his belt. He mouthed the word fuck before something crashed into him, a drooling, rotten husk that gnashed its teeth inches from his face. As I lined up a headshot and went to fire, something else knocked me from my feet. The world twisted in a dark blur, the flash of gunfire and lightning and darkness melting into one deft portrayal. The wind fled from my lungs and my head bounced off the floor, bringing me face to face with another grotesque, overgrown zombie. It wrapped its bony fingers around my throat and squeezed, and I felt the blood collect in my face as it choked me. Feeling the weight of the large handgun, I snaked it under its arms and placed the barrel underneath its chin. The head exploded in a pulpy mess that coated my face, and I tossed the corpse off of me to see the rest of my team. Boyd had wrestled one of them off of him, his hands grabbing it by the jaw and back of its head as he torqued down, breaking its neck. When it continued to squirm, he bashed its skull into the floor with an elbow, leaning his weight into it until the spasms stopped. Another leapt from the darkness of the hallway just in time to catch a burst from Franklin, who was now wedging himself between us and the horde. His eyes were sunken, his usually intense demeanor reduced to panic. I yanked a magazine from my belt and tossed it to Boyd. He reloaded as fast as he could, racking the bolt as he climbed to his feet. I wanted to check the watch, but I didn't have time. Instead, I raised my own gun and fired while Franklin pushed ahead. Despite his sudden sickness, Franklin pushed through them like a machine, emptying his last mag before flipping it around to use it like a club. He cracked one over the head and tossed the empty gun at another, drawing his knife before diving into the swarm that never seemed to end. Boyd was close behind, firing sparingly to avoid friendly fire as Franklin's moves became increasingly reckless. Aiming the magnum with shaking hands, I watched this massacre ensue. Franklin stomping the knee of an undead so it broke backwards before punching it in the throat, slashing the throat of another before running the blade up under its jaw, and shrugging off a rake across the chest before stabbing another through the eye. Just when it looked like Franklin's brutality was unstoppable, his counterattack ended just as quickly as it began, in the form of him leaning against the wall, visibly out of breath. The swarm simply looked at him for a moment before passing by him, eager to close the distance of the hallway, and with it, Boyd's gun. After 3 consecutive headshots, Boyd moved in closer to check on him, and I rushed in to help pull him out, firing into the crowd of limbs around him. "Franklin, we gotta pull back," Boyd started, but stopped as Franklin turned around. His eyes were unfocused, all the color draining from them as he looked at us. His pupils turned from light brown to a ghostly white, just before they rolled into the back of his head like the others behind him. We both hesitated, looking at his bulging muscles and the way the veins in his arms were popping and shifting, like vines. Without a word, Franklin dropped the knife and dug his thumbs into Boyd's eyes. Boyd emptied his rifle, shooting wildly, tearing through the guts of Franklin and other undead alike as he screamed. I reached for him and tried to pull him away, but several others rushed me, the darkness becoming a repetitive sequence of point and shoot as I tried to make my way to them. Square in the chest for one, 2 in the stomach for another, stuffing the barrel in between withered gums before watching it turn to mist. Each time the ammo counter dropped, the digits ticking down as each overgrown monster fell. By the time I aimed at another, I realized it was Franklin, and his teeth were pressed together as they ripped the bleeding flesh from Boyd's neck. The rifle was on the floor as he hung there weakly, bleeding from several gouges on his neck, chest, and face. His mouth was moving, uttering a single syllable that I would have taken as warning if I could have heard him. He repeated it again, and my eyes fell to the large grenade in his hand, one I didn't even know he had. Dangling from a finger was the pulled pin. Run. Rain. I opened my eyes to see the sky, a churning mass of clouds that rumbled soundlessly above. I didn't move for a time, only existing in the mud that conformed to my body. It almost looks peaceful above. But there's an anger to the storm that I don't understand. I can't hear the thunder or the wind on the trees, but I can tell it's pleased with my defeat. It relishes in it. I remember Boyd and Franklin, and I try to move. The effort brings on the worst pain I've ever felt in my life, but I push through until I start to roll. I try to brace myself with my left hand and fall face first into the mud, gasping for air as my body fails to operate. It is then I realize that the left arm is gone, blown away to a charred stump that's now trickling rainwater. I try again with the right, and see it come into view, pushing off the earth with the magnum still clutched in it. I'm tired of holding it, but I'm afraid to let it go. I make it to my knees and feel the air burn my lungs. My guess is a broken rib. Maybe several. The breaths I take in feel like poison, like my body doesn't want them. Ahead, there is a hill, steep and treacherous. I follow it up until I see the smoke, a twisting cloud that is eager to join the storm above. The cabin is on fire. One of the windows is shattered. I must have went through it. Staring into the scorching lumber, I remember the pumpkin patch. I remember the grenade. Boyd, Franklin. Behind me, the earth quakes. It feels like the planet is coming apart. Like all of existence is on its way out. I feel something moving. Shifting behind me. I don't want to look, but there's nothing left to do. My body screams as I turn. Something in my left leg is broken as well. Whether it's an ankle or the knee itself, I'm not certain. Before I can even complete the turn, I feel the shadow fall over me. Something I'm thankful I can't hear. I keep my eyes closed as I finish the turn, and when I open them, I can't believe what I see. A pumpkin of inconceivable size looms over me, its eyes staring like two triangular burning suns. Its shell steams under the touch of the rain, pulsing with the energy of a simmering volcano. Horribly disfigured and colossally wide, it consumes the entire length of the field like a nesting bird, slowly shifting as its stem grazes the sky, like a nightmare crafted by a titan. Looking up at it, I want to scream, but my mind breaks against the impossibility of it all. It's not even fear that I feel, but a primal need to no longer exist. The sun acts as pupils in its dreadful eyes, and when I see it notice me, it starts to rumble. A jagged tear forms across the front of it, like the depths of hell are emerging. It's then I realize that the fiery crevice is a mouth, and it's smiling. Lightning flashes, but it's so massive the arc disappears behind it. The giant pumpkin shakes, and suddenly the ground erupts around it. Hundreds, thousands of vines burst into the air, rearing up before violently whipping back to the ground below. Trees topple in rows as a shockwave forms, a tsunami of mud and wood annihilating both sides of the land as it continues to stare only at me. Staring as it starts to uproot itself, its many vines flexing like tentacles. Staring as it blots out the rain and pushes into the clouds. Staring as it comes crashing down. I look at the Magnum, and the ammo counter reading 1. The barrel is heavy. The taste of dirt cakes my teeth. Damn, we're close. So close. I hear the voices as I pull at the device on my head, and it comes away in a slick of sweat. At first the world is too loud and bright, but it starts to fade quickly as I'm suddenly reminded of where I am. I'm standing in a large adult arcade, crowded with over 100 fancy state-of-the-art machines. I'm at a bachelor party. Boyd and Franklin are behind me, pumping fists and laughing excitedly as they talk about headshots and knife kills and... "Hey man, how much further did you make it?" Franklin asks, and I'm taken aback by his gold chain and black button-up with rolled sleeves, a far cry from tactical military gear. But the thought fades away. This is right. This is how it's supposed to be. I scratch my head and feel that my hair is soaked. I look behind me and see a large multi-person VR console with a set of 4 headsets dangling. The sign above has a cartoony pumpkin mascot with burning eyes, hovering over large capital letters that read, "Pumpkin God." I'm not sure, it's hard to tell. Everything feels a little foggy. How long have you guys been out? I asked, trying to relax. I got out first. I remember being bitten and getting healed, I think, but I feel like I missed out on all the action. Boyd was just a minute or so later. Yeah, $40 for the premium gear, and we still didn't make it, Boyd said, wiping his brow. I remember Franklin getting overrun and remembering I had a grenade. I paid extra for it without telling you guys, so it'd be a surprise, but yeah, you were standing there for like 5 minutes. We almost got shots without you. You see the boss? Yeah, fucking huge. Don't remember much else. We didn't stand a chance. Sick, said Franklin. It's more brutal than I expected. Felt pretty real, too, Boyd said, rubbing his eyes. Imagine if we would have had a fourth, I said, looking at the untouched headset. I know. We stood there for a moment, each mentally reliving the experience. The memories quickly fading the longer we were out of it. The lights from the machines felt soothing, and the cacophony of arcade noises filled the silence. After a while, it was Franklin who spoke up first. So, shots? Time's wasting. Daddy's getting married soon. Hell yeah, I'll take 2. With a last look at the pumpkin god, we turned and headed for the bar, patting our pockets to make sure we still had our wallets and phones. As we were leaving, a guy in a Hawaiian shirt and a goth girl in a dress and fishnets brushed past us. Their attention immediately pulled to the glowing orange sign and hanging VR headsets. You think we should warn them? Boyd whispered. I recalled the burning eyes rocketing toward me, and the sensation of the bullet ripping through the top of my skull. Nah, they'll be fine. Tonight's story was written by Jesse Pullins. Jesse has a new book out. It's titled Seasonal Halloween Store, and it's available on Amazon. I'll include a link in the description below. And this book features a lot of really great Reddit No Sleep authors, people that you're probably familiar with, G-Trip14, Girl from the Crypt, myself, a bunch of other awesome writers, Blair Daniels. So I hope you'll check out this book and look at the description below for more information. Very proud to be featured in this book, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks, have a great night. Today's video was supported by patrons like Mark from Earth, Crimson Muse, Joy Burton, Diane Showers, Mark Sewall, Cheryl James, Picker Sticker, Teddy Dog, Clue404, Mamakato, Dante Kincaid, Zarin Ray, Angela Donovan, Blarian50, Devin Kyle, Timothy Baird, Ajeti, Bert Turner, Bajani Espinal, Michael Pierce, Big Joe, Carrie Harkonnen, LaDonna Spivey, Scott Tanaka, Tom Stewart, Sherman Davis, Bryce Shelton, Susan McClendon, Elise Batiste, Lisa and the Cult Jam, Open Circuit, Fabulavore, Raymond Jaggers, and That Darn Fox. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward. And if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in the next Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. It really does help out a lot. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.